I just finished the Diablo 4 live interview with Blizzard's Adam Jackson. This is going to be a quick recap of all of the questions that we asked during the interview. Question number one was, are we going to be seeing more focus on the Paragon board now that the gameplay focus has shifted into the post-100 realm?
My personal opinion talking here, but I think that there's definitely room to make Paragon more interesting. Adding new boards and things is always on the table. That is something that we can do and probably is something that we will do. The way that we kind of think of Paragon is that it's kind of your one-stop shop where we try to make stats cool. Why you care about strength, why you care about whatever stats you're chasing, like it's one of those places where we try to make it a little bit more interesting and robust. I think we did a decent job at the launch game with Paragon, but I think that there's more that we could add to the depth of the system to make it just more appealing. You know, we did a little bit of that in season 2. If you remember, we started adding scaling mechanics where we turn some of your stats that are always additive into multiplicative scaling stats. I would expect that we do more in the future. Of course, nothing to announce, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it right now, is that it's cool. We think there's more opportunity to do cool things there. Something simple like adding new boards. Yeah, I don't think there's really a high risk there, and it's something that I could totally see us doing. That being said, there are some like UX issues that I think we know about with Paragon. Like, you know, it can be a pain to reset and fill in all the many little blips that you have to. Like, I think those are actually more concerning issues that I would rather see us tackle than only adding new content. I think we can do both, of course. But you know, these are kinds of the things of the problems that we're looking to solve, I guess you could say, with Paragon. Simplicity is always a factor because we do want people to understand our game, and ARPGs are notoriously crunchy. But if there is a place that we can be a little crunchier, I would say it is in Paragon.
Question number 2 is about clarity in information. They recently updated saying there's going to be changes to temporary affixes as well as some more balance changes before the launch of Season 4. And we asked whether or not we could get clarity on these changes since people are going to be deciding their class and build before the season launches.
When it comes to patch notes and what we show to players between PTR and live is that we kind of have rules and guidelines for how we present patch notes and what we put in them between releases. And PTR is kind of a special case because PTR, we're introducing new content to you for the first time, but then the live patch is actually when we introduce that content for real, and I'm using air quotes, right? Because not everybody is expected to play the PTR. PTR is also notoriously not balanced because it's way earlier in development than when we would normally release something. And so, you know, managing expectations and how we present patch notes is something that we're still figuring out. What that really means is, you know, when we introduce whole new systems to the game, we don't specify every single little detail of them. As an example, in the PTR, you know, when we introduce the recipes, we don't list every single tempering recipe and what the numbers are right now. Notes are already huge. It would blow them out. So in the future, I think we can show more. But as far as like specifics, if you want to know some of the things like that are changing with tempering, there's a whole lot of number changes. Most of them are minor and aren't really that big of a deal. We did shift around what stats are in what recipes and that kind of stuff to make more sense based on feedback. And then we did adjust some things that were just the typical, this is early in development and wasn't intended at all, but it's PTR. So, you know, this is when you get to see it. The ranks of Golem Masteries in that category, I think people were getting crazy, like 25 plus or something ranks. No, it's supposed to be just like every single other passive that you get. It's only in, you know, very few slots, and it's very special when you get it.
Since this had to do with the public test realm, the follow-up question was, did you guys get what you were hoping to get out of the public test realm?
Oh, absolutely. In spades. When we release very large swaths of the game, like I would say the launch was the closest to this. Season 2 was moderately close to this, but I think this is bigger than that. We gave people stats and powers that they never had access to, where we let you get bonus projectiles across the board or area size. Those are very high risk things. Not only are they scary because of balance, but they're scary because of like PC performance and breaking servers and stuff. Because a lot of our game wasn't made in mind with every projectile could not just have one more, but be doubled in the amount. Sure. Or, you know, the size of these skills were handcrafted to be, this is the size. And so we have to figure out how we're going to manage these things for the long term and be healthy in the game. PTR was incredibly helpful for that. But I would say the bigger important one was like, how does the game feel? Like the playing through the whole experience of tempering, masterworking, and that progression. You know, we can have an idea of it, but you know, when you have 50, 100, 200, even 1,000 people playing it, it's not nearly as much information as you would think compared to like 10 million people playing it, right? Or whatever. Sure. They'll find things in 5 minutes that might take us 5 days.
Question number 4 was, now that itemization is being completed and launched in Season 4, what is the next major focus for the development team?
Immediate future, I think actually the focus of the team is on reacting to Season 4 and this big upheaval that we made to the game. I am very sure that there will be cracks in tempering and masterworking and the player journey as far as, the pit and how all of this feels when put together of like how good the game actually is. And those cracks are going to need to be iterated on and filled a little bit of like, hey, we need more tempering recipes here, or hey, the progression of the pit doesn't feel that great there, or whatever, right? So making those and refining those to be good is the immediate largest concern by a pretty good amount. But thinking a little bit more long term, like things that aren't
Sure.
immediate reactions to season 4. But I think that there's still going to be room to try and make the end game better for longer. Also on the class side, personally, one of the things that's on my mind a lot is trying to catch up other classes to Barbarian, because Barbarians have more weapons. This has been a big thorn in our side for a very long time, of that they kind of have 2 class mechanics and everybody else has 1. And so our current plan is to kind of juice up those other classes so that they're really crazy, impactful, and good and feel awesome, so that they kind of make up for the lack of aspects that Barbarians get. We kind of addressed it a little bit in season 4 with the Necromancer, where we just juiced the Book of the Dead and made it crazy, powerful, and good. Tried to do it in a way that wasn't just numbers, like make it cool. And so we're going to see how that goes, but I want to do that for the other classes.
I was just curious, like we talk about endgame, that's the focus. Endgame, endgame, endgame. I'm curious about the definition. Like, what are we talking about when we say endgame?
We used to think of endgame as everything after the campaign, but in my mind, it's when you have access to all of the activities that you can do in the game, which to me would now probably be whenever you go into the pit, because there's no activity after that is like a new activity that you could not access at all. Either that or level 100, if you want to think about it that way.
Since the answer to this question was they're focusing on in-game, I asked the follow-up question. How are you able to continually progress the in-game, considering that players consume content quicker than you can development, while you're also at a deficit in-game already? That plus the fact the level 1 to 100 is faster than it's ever been, players are reaching in-game even faster than before. So how are they fixing this problem?
Oh, God. This is a very long answer, and I could go into it for a long time, so I'll try to keep it brief. It's a very difficult problem, and it is one that I think every ARPG has, and it's one that we all have to kind of live with and mitigate, but there isn't a perfect forever solution. Players want content, and our game is a power fantasy. That's what ARPGs are, right? We sell you on, you do things to become more powerful, to have a new mountain to climb, to be more powerful, to have a new mountain to climb. Problem is, there are only so many mountains that we can make. The first thing we try to do is create as many mountains as we can. But like you said, people are crazy and they consume content really, really quick. Some of them do, some of them not so much. And we have to balance between those 2 player types, which is a whole nother conversation. For the people that can consume that content quickly, we want to make sure that there's things for them to do that are interesting and meaningful. And so this is why you see a very common way that ARPGs are designed is that we use random generated dungeons and random generated content for the end game, and why we do things like scale things either pretty hard or infinitely, so that you have a challenge against your player power, right? Like player power goes up, you need something to fight against it as you're getting better. That's kind of like the box that we're in when we're designing. And a lot of our work as designers is how do we make fun content and resolve these issues as best we can. And so you're going to see us, kind of bounce back and forth of like infinitely scaling content, but also matching that with milestone content. Aspirational content is another word that people like to use that I like, of, like Uber Lilith or these things where it's like, I get this thing, I see this thing, it's a fixed difficulty, I want to get good enough to beat that, and then I feel good and I can either stop or try and go to the next thing until there's things that run out, and then I'm happy and I leave happy.
Gazi had a follow-up question to this, asking if they're trying to focus more on the new players and the new player acquisition, or on the reoccurring in-game users that are already very familiar with the game.
There's actually a lot of different classes of players and the types of people that play Diablo 4, because it's such a large game. We're trying to appeal to many different types of people that play RPGs, and even those that this is their introductory game. So our task is a little different than some other games where, they have a more specific focus. We try to grab it all. We're greedy.
Rolling into more content questions, we asked about overworld and strongholds, and if there was the potential to continue developing these. This actually ended up turning into a little bit more of a, not argument, but debate around what actually constitutes as repetitive content that is enjoyable.
I think there's a concept that's very interesting. I would advise you and any of your followers who really want to get into game design or want to talk better about game design. There was a really great GDC presentation made by a guy named Alex Jaffe. And he gave one of the best presentations I've ever seen on game design. And he gave the presentation on something called cursed problems in game design. When you make a game of a certain archetype, you immediately make a bunch of promises to the player. There are these things that are so fundamental to the foundation of your game that you can't get away from them. And they're kind of your partner forever or weight on your back that you have to deal with that you never get rid of, but you can mitigate. A cursed problem, I would argue, in ARPGs like Diablo and any other game, you'll probably have seen this problem, is that they are games of efficiency. We promise you player power is a big reason why you play these games. You start off as this peon person that kind of sucks and isn't very strong, and you grow into this really crazy master of magic or strength or whatever that can do incredible things. The way that we deliver you on that promise is we give you power as you play the game more and progress through the activities, usually in the form of gear, but also in other ways too, right? Skill points, Paragon, whatever it is. What that translates to is that anything that you are doing in the game that isn't progressing your power is very hard to sell a player on. And it's even harder to sell them if it's not a repeatable activity that they can keep doing to get stronger and stronger. When you ask me, hey, Adam, what do you think of strongholds or world bosses or Uber Lilith balance or a whole lot of other problems? Strongholds are intended, and why they are cool and why they go against the rest of our game and why it's really hard for us is that they are meant to be one-shot, awesome, kind of story-based, really handcrafted, curated content, right? I would equate this to Uber Lilith statues, where we got this question the other day.
Sure.
The campaign experience, we get a question. These are all actually the same question, which is, hey, you people on D4 made this one-shot experience that we really love and is cool. We want to do it more. The problem is the moment you cross that line from one-shotting and it being cool to being a repeatable activity, now that activity is competing with everything else in the game that is repeatable content. Because now Strongholds has to compete against Helltide, Nightmare Dungeons, The Pit, Gathering Uniques, all of that, or has to fit in there in some way.
So what makes Strongholds different? Like, why can't we do an Uber version of a Stronghold, since people say they want to replay it, but we can do an Uber version of bosses that are already in the game?
We absolutely can. But then you've changed it from one shot, this is a cool experience that's very unique, and that is what the fantasy is of people that like it. Now you've changed that to repeatable content that you're going to do 10, 20, 100 times over. That puts a lot more design constraint and limitations of what you can make that content. When you do something 500 times, you care about things that you wouldn't care about if you did it one time. Why did you have to ride your horse to Nightmare Dungeons when we launched the game? It was fun the first time, world building, immersion, really cool. Doing it 500 times because that's all that you're doing at your end game, not so fun.
Just for the sake of the debate here. So let's say we wanted Uber Strongholds and you say, well, you know, DM, you liked it the first time. You might not like it the 100th time. And I say, fair enough. Well, what if we took some of the rewards I would either get from the pit, like a grab bag? We take some of the pit rewards. We take some of the Uber level 200 rewards. And we throw almost like a world boss loot pinata as an option to be one of these mountains that you mentioned earlier. Maybe we don't want to make it the best thing. Maybe we want to make it a breakup of the experience so that we can get basically the same resources we got to get literally anyway from something else, but it gives us variety in terms of gameplay. Now, I'm not arguing this is the best way to go with the game. I'm just curious about the thought process behind that.
I think that's a good question. The answer is yes, we can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Usually it doesn't. The reason why, in my experience, it's really hard to tell somebody, hey, you have option A and option B. Option A is 100% efficient. Option B is 70% efficient. What does 100% of players do? Maxroll makes guides. What is the best Nightmare Dungeon you want to do? Everybody makes guides. What is the quickest way to do the thing? What is the most efficient?
I feel like what makes an ARPG great is to make people distracted from the fact that they are playing an ARPG. Because in reality, we are doing the same thing over and over and over again with the only goal of improving our character. So having options, whether or not they are slightly less rewarding, but the fact that you have options to engage with for the sake of in-game replayability, longevity, would allow you to be distracted from that fact and actually enjoy your time.
We do things like this. Some ways, for example, that we get you to do a variety of activities because we do want you to, is like a common strategy is we gate certain rewards behind certain activities, which makes you need to go and do multiple things, right? I think a better solution, we've kind of moved a little bit more in this, is you get some activities or materials or whatever from many places. There is one place that is the most efficient, but you're getting pseudo efficiency somewhere else, and that feels really good. Example of this would be doing Helltides with Whispers, and we want to do that and do that more. And that, I think, is kind of an answer for your Uber Strongholds question. I'm not saying, by the way, my answer is not we can't do Uber Strongholds because of these problems. Sure. What I'm saying is I'm trying to teach you why it's not so easy as just like, hey, make Uber Strongholds replayable and now everybody's going to love them immediately. We think about that content differently now.
Totally.
And that requires a little more thought and care, not just in rewards, but how it feels to go through it over and over again, right? Because it's fixed.
The next question was about skill diversity. Unique items in Diablo 4 are one of the only ways to fundamentally change what a skill actually does. The question to this is, are you planning to add this variability to skills outside of the skill tree and unique items?
Fun fact, when we were originally designing things in the game, a lot of the changing of the skills was actually in the skill tree and in we called them A/B choices, but the different upgrades you could get for your skill. And we moved a little bit away from that. Some of them are still a little transformative. I think that we can make them a little bit more so in the skill tree as we do in the future. That's one way that I think we can make the skill tree interesting. We ended up doing more legendaries and uniques as the space that we do that because we knew that items were so important, and being excited for a late game item to drop was a very core part of the game. We've kind of now made that a lot better with like greater affixes, for example, and things in season 4. So I think there is more room to make transformative upgrades in other places than items. I also am very comfortable with the system that we have now, and I kind of like it. It gives you obvious things to chase with items, and it feels good to get an item that is a big upgrade that changes how you play. So I guess I'd be open to feedback from people. Like, is there a place that you think is superior to items to get these kinds of effects? Like, is it cooler to have it be deterministic in the Paragon board versus you're farming for something and you see the moment that it drops that transforms your gameplay?
I was wondering how these unique items or skill altering modifiers, no matter where you get them, how that would impact the class design when it comes to focusing on keeping or maintaining the specific fantasies of classes.
So when I think of a build, or our team thinks of a build, we try and think of the entire package and we compare it to the whole other package of a class. I don't think of a build like, I don't know, Frozen Orb, right? When I think of like the total power and coolness and strength and all that, there's a journey that needed to be made, but I think of it as you end with all the things. When we think about like designing a new class, or when we're first designing these classes, we have to think of, how do we make an interesting and good player journey from the beginning when you first use a skill, making that as impactful and cool as possible, while at the same time balancing against you need to leave room for growth and making things crazy and awesome and make it better. Some skills are easier to do than others with that, I would say. We definitely had a lot of things before the game came out, discussions about like, hey, this skill it feels really crappy early on. And we're like, yeah, it gets really crazy later on though. They're like, yeah, but who's going to pick it up if it feels really shitty early on? You have to balance the two things. And that one is like, it's just a bunch of discussions and iteration, even when the game is live, of people complain about it, right? And we're like, yeah, we agree. And then we change it. Example, that would be like Barbs and Druids for a while have been complaining that early game kind of sucks, but then late game they're powerhouses. And that's kind of been the identity. And so we've been like alleviating over and over again of like basic skills are a little better. They're a little better. We don't want to go too far, but we keep making them better, right? So that's kind of how we think of it. We think of the whole package and we try to make sure that your journey is enjoyable and good.
Now we get into the rapid fire portion of questions, in which we go through a large list and try to get fast responses. The first question was raids coming to the game.
First, I would say this is just Adam's personal opinion, not the team. I think raids are interesting and cool. They would present quite a few hurdles for us to overcome that make things tough. Even now, we have a problem where we're always competing against solo players' efficiency versus group play efficiency. There's a lot of people that play Diablo and RPGs that really have a strong identity with wanting to play by themselves and not be required to go into a group. And if we put in this type of content where we say, hey, you must go into a group to play this, then we have to reconcile that of like, how do we either balance that around can solo players do it as well? And if they do, then why is it group content? Or yeah, too bad. You have to also be in a group to engage with this. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the rewards for that content. Because if we make the rewards something that a solo player also needs, then we're making them go into a group when they may not want to. But if we make we make the rewards for that type of content the other way, where it's not something you need, then why do people do it in the first place? I do think though that overall, the idea of getting with a group of your buddies or random strangers and doing like a 10-man fight on a huge like dungeon or whatever with a big boss at the end that requires mechanics, like that is really cool and appealing.
The second question was about solo self-found and if they're planning to implement this. His answer was interesting.
I think it'd be cool. Nothing to announce today.
Then we asked about PvP for the PvP community that's out there for Diablo 4. We asked about development of additional content for those players.
Don't have anything to announce when it comes to PvP specific content. I would say I think we would be more interested from those people. Like, what would they want to see from us? Do you want like an arena type system where we pre-program your gear for you? Do you like open world? Do you want some type of different progression system? Kind of like the group versus solo play, the PvP versus PvE discussion is a little similar of like, the more that we emphasize emphasize it or give unique rewards to it, the more that we're saying to everybody that doesn't want to do that, hey, you must do this to progress your character. So like, what would they want to see? Do they want to see a better way of interacting with PvP? Is it just that the balance is crazy? Because I think that people kind of embrace the crazy balance in Diablo PvP. But that's where I think I would start the discussion.
Clan management has a small issue in which you can't see how long it's been for people to be offline. So we asked if they're planning to change that.
I'm not involved with that group, so I can't give it. I actually don't know, but I feel like that's very reasonable. I think we could bring that back to the team pretty easily. I will say we do have a team that works on like UX issues, user experience issues, like, you know, the ideas that we get over like group finder or armory party finder. This type of support, we have a team that's looking at it. I know that they're working on stuff, but that seems very reasonable to me.
Asked about non-combat pets. This is something that was in Diablo 3, and they do seem to be doing more Diablo 3 related content lately.
We have discussed it. I think it'd be cool. Don't have anything to share.
This brought us to DPS meters, potentially on dummies.
Think it's cool. Don't have anything to announce.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I'm actually thinking a little bit more about that. And maybe feedback would be useful of like, is it really only on dummies that you want to do it to test builds, or would you want to see it in the rest of the game? Seeing, you know, DPS meters are kind of notorious in other game types, but I'm not sure that we have the same problems. People being upset with each other for not doing as much damage and all that kind of stuff.
I then asked about the offline mode and if this is something that could potentially be added to Diablo 4.
I have not heard any discussions about it. I would doubt it.
Glyph leveling outside of Nightmare Dungeon. Is there any quality of life for glyph leveling was the next question.
We've talked about it a bit. Nothing to announce. I think kind of going back to the idea with Helltides and Whispers, I think it is cool to have a less efficient way to do something while you're being efficient doing something else. That's my personal opinion though, and kind of what I feel, but I'm not on the systems team and don't know the nuances of glyph leveling specifically and why we keep it in one place, but I wouldn't be surprised, I guess is what I would say, but I don't have a guarantee there.
After that, we asked about surprise events. Can we get, for instance, Goblin Vaults? This is something from Diablo 3 as well.
We've added a couple in Season 4, kind of mini events where like you have a chance when you kill an elite and it'll spawn into like a ton of gold or a ton of materials or things or give you way more than normal. We like the idea of surprise events. I think you can expect us to make more in the future.
Then we got into a interesting question that Ghazi asked about support builds and their viability within Diablo 4. One example of these would be like the ZDPS builds from D3.
We were a lot more scared about it when we launched the game. I remember people kept asking me like, Adam, can we make more support builds, make more things of like cross synergy is really cool. And I agree it's cool. The other side of that is kind of that issue we deal with forever of group versus solo play is that the better we make a support build, the more we're saying the best way to play this game is to go with 4 people, support your friends, and you get multiplicative, massively increased amounts of output, right? We do want it. We have it a little bit with Barbarian Shouts, right? And we've even added some legendaries that do it. Like there's a Druid one that turns your Blood Howl into an AoE buff. But I don't think it's one of those we have to walk the line very carefully, I think, because it can be very detrimental to the game if we go too far.
There was another question about community events and whether or not there's going to be larger scale launches that the community are involved in. For instance, maybe the community designs a legendary item.
I think it'd be awesome. I'm not against it at all, but those are checks that I can't cash. So yeah, I would love to. I'm not going to make it, but yes, I would love an AQ event like that in D4 or something, or even community making a legendary. Oh, how scared am I of that? I don't know, probably, but we can find a way to balance it. I don't know. I think it'd be cool.
Was once again asked in this interview about a map overlay. Here's his response on that.
This is personal Adam thoughts, not company thoughts, because everybody has different opinions, I think, and we've talked about map overlay internally quite a bit. There's such obvious pros and cons, and I think different types of players really want to engage in different ways. I personally am not completely against a map overlay being in the game, but I understand why there are people that feel strongly that, you know, we really don't want to try and make a game where you're looking at your map the whole time and not all of this beautiful world and art and things that we've created to try and immerse the player, and then they're so into the systems and the efficiency game that we pull them out of it. We know it's an efficiency game, but we don't want it to feel that exposed all the time that you must feel pressured to do things perfectly all the time. And a map overlay pushes that pretty hard. It changes the game pretty fundamentally for a lot of people, and there's a pressure there now. It's kind of like DPS meters in many games too, I would equate it to. Like the moment you introduce that, you kind of can't go back, and you've changed how people interact with your game forever.
Got a maybe when it goes to an ultimate button. His answer was just, maybe.
Maybe. We thought heavily and worked long and hard deciding the number of buttons that you're going to have total on your bar at all. And those buttons were determined by thinking of how many different actions do we want a player to worry about at any given time. There's also would need to be a lot of rebalancing of ultimates when we fully expect people to have one versus that they can choose whether or not they do. That work we could do, I think. It's more of like, do I want to balance and design everything assuming a player has an ultimate in addition to all of their other skills, and what that means to how we have to change ultimates or do other things. I think it's doable, but I don't know that I'm very excited about the prospect unless there's a very clear win.
Had a couple cosmetic questions here related to a color wheel. Seems like that's possible. We asked about non-horse mounts. Here's his response on that one.
I think we should, and I wouldn't be surprised if we did it, but I'm not involved in those conversations. But I think I personally feel like it's a no-brainer.
Then we asked about wings. This is sort of a controversial one, as some people actually don't like wings within the Diablo series. Makes sense. So this is his response to that one.
Yeah, that's a little more controversial. Return to Darkness was one of our big guiding philosophies when we were making D4 up to launch. And this idea that, hey, this game is going back to kind of D1, D2 roots of being scary and a little more, gruesome and dark and dreary. And we even with the combat, that's why we have Evade, is like you have to dodge attacks and really plan because this world is dangerous. In some ways, we've learned that players, want to blast and they don't care as much as we over-indexed a little bit on it. Sure. But it is still something that we care about. So like now before Wings was kind of in that, it's making the game a little bit, it doesn't fit the vibe we're going for, but we've moved a bit. But have we moved enough that wings are okay now? I don't know.
Asked about cosmetics for minions, perhaps.
I think it would be cool. It's a lot harder to do for minions than for players, though, or even like wings, because you can have 1 million minions on your screen, and how loud that is a concern. But I don't think it's an impossibility.
And then we had a couple meme questions like cow level.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And of course, I had to shout out Rax by asking about Uber Tomb Lord.
I think it'd be cool. I'm down. I don't know, whatever people want to fight. I mean, we could make it.
At this point, we basically said, thank you so much. Here's him wrapping up in his last thoughts on the interview.
First, thanks to both of you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
We really enjoy these conversations. I look forward to doing more. For everybody else, one of the things I'm really passionate about, like first, go listen to that presentation that I talked about on cursed problems. One of my goals with getting in front of people and talking with them, and I've done this ever since I started as a developer. You can go look at interviews with me years ago from Heroes, but I like having better discussions with you all and with players that are a little more informed. So as people get passionate and want to learn about game design, it's easy just to be like, hey, why don't you add this? And we can answer those questions. But I like more in-depth ones, and we do on the team, of like, hey, why does this work the way it does? And can we find a way to make it work and get what we want, right? Like when you counter back at me with like the strongholds question, like, can't we, okay, Adam, I listened to you. I understand your problem space. Now that I've thought about it, can we do this and why or why not? Like that to me is a better discussion and a better culture, a better world, really, if I want to get sappy, of like, be informed when talking about things and care about it and think about it and don't just blast like, hey, just do this, right? If you care enough to really want to know, like, think about it and have real discussions. And so I want to be a force for that, I guess, in the community. And I think other people on our team do as well. So
thanks, man.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed the time. So enjoy talking with you both.
And that's pretty much it at this point. Thanks so much for watching the video. Hope you got some information you wanted to see out of it. And it looks like we might potentially get more of these in the future. Pez Radar was in the chats and said he's going to try to do more of these. That's not a promise, just something I noticed in the Twitch chat.